Hello, welcome. My name is Jim Peterson, and I'm going to be painting a watercolor painting called SnowyShacks. But first, let's run through some materials, and then we'll get right into the painting process. First of all, my brushes. We'll start with the one I'm going to use the most, and that's a Taklon fiber watercolor wash brush, and it's a brush that I'm growing more fond of. This one is made by Creative Mark and has an angular edge to it. One of my mainstays for the last 30 years is this Grumbacher Finest, it's actually not a Grumbacher anymore. Used to be made by Grumbacher, but now made by the New York Brush Company. 1-inch sable flat wash brush with the made in the aquarelle style with the chiseled edge. These two brushes are round brushes. One's a Taklon round, and I like that material a lot. The fiber is as strong and durable as sable, and it's got better snap, and it's got a better point, and it's got a better price. You can't beat it, except that the sable brushes have more water retention ability, and that's very important. But it's a great buy. This is a white nylon round brush, which I use for small detail work, and I'll be definitely using that today. Now, my palette is a Pike's palette. It does have a cover. You can see it does pull apart, does have a cover. And let me just indicate the paints that I'm going to be using today. I'm going to start over here in the dark, cool range with indanthrene blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, cadmium yellow, benzimida orange, and cadmium red, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. The brands that I prefer, I'll just put a few out here. There are others that I like, but basically the Da Vinci paints are a great buy and good quality paint. The Grumbacher Finest material is excellent, especially in the blue, cerulean blue, cobalt blue range. I like De La Rowney materials. This is a indanthrene blue. It's my latest passion. It's a very dark, intense blue, which adds a lot of value contrast to the painting without getting muddy. So we'll be using a lot of that today. And let the painting begin. Now, you'll notice on this painting right now, there's a lot of graphite on it. And so one of the purposes for soaking the paper, beside the fact that it's a wet painting and we need to soak the paper, is to get rid of all that excess graphite. I think that a drawing is an extremely important part of my painting process, especially in watercolor. And you can see I've made a lot of mistakes in this drawing, and I've done a lot of changing in the process. Hopefully, the painting will be a better painting because of that. Make mistakes in the drawing. It's a lot easier to erase a graphite mistake than it is to scrub out a watercolor mistake. Watercolor medium, even though I've made that last comment, the watercolor medium is an extremely adjustable medium, and you'll see me making all sorts of errors and mistakes and changing and fixing them. Wet painting is a process whereby we apply a lot of wet paint on a very wet piece of paper. And as the paper dries, so does the paint in our brush. We paint with less fluid in the brush, and we can end up with a lot of very controlled effects, even on a moist piece of paper, by controlling the water in the brush. So it's just taking quite a bit of scrubbing because of all the graphite that I've got here. But it's coming together pretty well. This Arches watercolor paper is what I'm using, staple stretched, And it's an extremely durable piece of paper and highly recommended for any process that involves a lot of correction and scrubbing out. Now the first step here is really fun for me because I'm going to be just putting a lot of paint down and seeing how it goes, making adjustments. And I think of it as a Rorschach ink blot. I get an image that's beginning to look good, then I'll go with it, I'll hold on to what I have, but if it's not looking good, I will erase it. It's very easy to erase, as you'll see, when the paper's wet and the paint's wet. Let's just get started here. Watercolor has one disadvantage, and that is it dries significantly lighter than when you put it down initially, more so than any other painting medium. And because of that, you really have to exaggerate the colors, and it makes it hard to make accurate value discriminatory judgments, especially at the very beginning, but towards the end too. But that's okay. You learn to deal with that. Now, this is an underpainting, and as such, I'm not working with the painting colors that I'm usually associate with these areas of the painting. For instance, this is going to be an overall very blue painting with some undertones of warmth in the sky in the foreground, and then we'll have a very warm orange and red series of shacks here. But that's not what you see as far as the underpainting. The underpainting, I'm actually going for a bit of a complement, so that even though the sky area will be cool and blue, we're going to see some of this orange and warmth poking through. Not a lot, but some. And that goes for the foreground too. Also, in this painting, intend to make it a vignette if I can make it work. Vignettes I find are extremely difficult to do, but I think this one will lend itself to being a vignette. Now, a vignette is simply a painting that has a lot of white or very light colors in the corners and integrated into the painting. Also, there will be a lot of white. They're fun to try. So at this point, I'm actually going to be making some decisions about the foreground. Oops. Okay. And getting my first peek at some of the actual color range I'm going to be working with. Now, thinking in terms of vignette here, I need to make sure those corners are white. There we go. And let's wipe this off. Paper is drying very quickly here. For wet into wet, it's nice to be in a nice moist climate, and we're not. This is Boulder, Colorado, and we're inside on a winter day. We have a very dry room, so one way to do that, working vertically and keep the paper moist, is to make sure that the top of the page is kept wet. That's the first area that's going to dry. If you can keep it wet, it'll keep the rest of the paper moist. And I'm going to start going now for the design itself with the sky. And I'm going for I want to achieve a gunmetal gray effect. And I'm mixing burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is just a wonderful color to mix into other colors to get some nice dark tones. It looks pretty dark now, doesn't it? Even under all these lights. It's not going to dry dark though, and I'm very aware of that. I'm making adjustment strokes. now with clear water. And now get some of those nice blue wintry mountains that we have here in Boulder. The scene itself, these shacks were found in North Boulder, and I took the resource in 1985, so they no longer exist. But it was a cold winter day when I took them, and I've used them several times for resources. Now, pretty intense color. If it dries middle value, that's middle dark, I'll be surprised. So I'm making adjustment strokes now. I think I'll pull back some whites. And we'll continue on over here. Now we're going to moderate that blue a bit. Now it's time I got a little more control of this wet medium, and basically the main way to do that is to control the amount of water in your brush. In other words, think of it as painting dry brush into a wet piece of paper. And that's what I'm doing now, and now you'll find the paint's not going everywhere. It's not flowing all over the place. I'm going to be working with these trees here in a bit, so I want to set those trees up by giving them a base color, an orangey base color, touch of brown. And that's going to be true here with these structures, so I'm going to just leak that right in from the trees, right into the shacks themselves. The shacks, of course, are going to be the center of interest. There are a couple of ways to dry the brush, because undoubtedly you're going to I get too much water in here, especially with these big brushes. One way is to just tap the brush onto the paper itself. The other way is to squeeze it right against that metal ferrule and actually let the fabric working cloth here soak the water out at the ferrule itself, and that's probably the best way, the most effective way. And I'm working with a very dry brush now on wet paper. One quality of a wet into wet painting is that often the last thing to be worked on is the center of interest, so there's always a bit of a excitement involved with this kind of painting. And the excitement is the guy going to pull it off? So you can join me in this excitement because it's fun for me to do. And of course, I have the advantage of knowing where I'm going with this, and I'm always trying to work about 2 or 3 steps ahead, setting things up for the final step, which will bring it all together. Well, you can see we're getting some value contrast now. Again, it's not going to stay this dark. So it's time, though, that I actually painted something that's going to stay as dark as I want it to. And at some point in the fairly early stages, in the wet stage of the painting, I like to do that. So I'm going to switch brushes over to a little more detailed brush, a smaller brush. It's my 1-inch sable. And I'm going to actually get some very dark paint going. And we'll talk about how to get a dark value to stay dark. So this is pretty dark, but it's still wet paint. And that, because it's wet paint, it means it's going to dry lighter. Generally speaking, I do not expect an area of paint to stay as dark as I put it down until I've overpainted it 2 or 3, at least twice, but usually 3 times. Okay, I'm taking away paint now. I'm subtractive watercolor painting with a dry brush. And let's go darker. And I'm going to try some of that indanthrene blue, pure. And that's about the 3rd layer of paint I put on this particular area of the painting. And that's not enough yet. I find that I need to have someplace at an early stage, someplace in the painting, be as dark as it's going to be. There we go. If I don't, then I'm always trying to second guess myself, and I'm not very successful at that. So now I've got a foil, a dark foil to work against. I know now the range of paint that I'm going to work within. What I just did now is called scumbling, and it's a technique common in oil paint, but very rarely used in watercolor. But it's really nice at this stage of the painting to touch in some opaque color, like in a cerulean blue, right into a very dark, transparent area. And the end result is a very interesting wet look with a lot of quality to, positive, fresh quality. And it only really works when the underlaying layer is moist and wet. Okay. Now, I promised some activity on those trees, and that's what we're going to be doing next. Since I've set that up, use a little dry brush. The paper is still moist, but with a real dry brush like I'm using, I can still get some nice ragged edge quality that's going to be of interest. Okay, I think that's going to be good enough for that for now. And if you notice on the resource, there are some nice trees in here, some pine trees and bushes. And we're going to be dealing with an early morning or late evening scene, probably late evening or late in the afternoon. And so we're going to have a bit of a warm side. Let's see if I can make that work. This is definitely a trial and error process with these trees. And I don't know whether those are going to work. We're going to see. I do know that if I can make it work, it'll be nice to have some warmth up there. And we'll continue on this motif of dark tree shapes while the paint's still wet up here. And then we're losing the moisture down here. I may have to re-wet, but while it's moist up here, I do want to have some fun with that. Well, that little area is getting to a level of finish that I like, and that's going to give me some a point of departure, a familiarity for me to anchor the rest of the painting to that. And as far as the amount of finish I want to get to it. So let's continue on. Now I'm painting around these trees, and I just find that that painting around is just a tremendous advantage that watercolor has, because we don't use white paint in watercolor. We're forced to paint dark things around objects to make them look light. And when I began painting, I thought that was a tremendous disadvantage. If I wanted to paint a tree, I wanted to paint it directly. I did not want to have to paint around it. It always seemed so much harder to paint around. But I found that painting around is no harder than painting, as long as you get past the emotional feeling that it's got to be harder. No harder, and according to the work of Betty Edwards, who I greatly respect, if you paint around something, you're painting the negative shapes, you put yourself on the right side of the brain. And that is where you want your perception, where you want yourself to be residing as an artist. The right side of the brain is where you have the greatest hand-eye coordination. You're in touch with your greatest critical abilities, artistic critical abilities. And you make good decisions. You do good painting. And that, I'm afraid, is a hard-won lesson that I've made that I wish someone had hit me on the head earlier and just told me to do that all the time. So anyway, Betty Edwards' book is drawing from the right side of the brain, and she does the job there. And as far as I can tell, everything she says works. Okay, now I'm going to just begin working within the center of interest. It's about time. I still haven't done the foreground yet, but the center of interest is the most important part of the painting. The foreground is the second most important part. And there's always a problem, of course. You can't make the foreground more interesting than the center of interest, otherwise you're going to end up in a state of conflict, and that's not a very good visual effect to achieve in painting. But the foreground is important because of the way we look at the world. We look at the world in such a way that we always look at the foreground to get clues about what's happening in the scene that we're viewing in reality. So in this case, the foreground needs to have some definite detail. And I just find that if you don't have it, the painting feels unfinished, even though you might have a spectacular, highly detailed center of interest and sky and left and right side. If you don't have that foreground over as a secondary center of interest, then it's not going to look finished. Well, we're arriving at a color scheme here that is complementary. In other words, we're dealing with blues and oranges and analogous colors, pretty much. There are no greens. And so this really is one of the official color schemes that art material theorists and color theorists love to promote as being important. And snow is a great excuse to get into the blues. Now, snow doesn't always look blue, of course, but if you see a light area of blue, we're hard pressed to not think of it as snow. Maybe water, but not snow, but not anything else. So I'm using that here to push the blues and give it gives me a good excuse to do a blue painting. One of my teachers, Robert E. Wood, always said, when in doubt, speed up. And gets you on the right side of the brain. So what I'm going to do here, I'm not feeling too in doubt. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. But I want to speed up anyway. I do want to finish this today. So I'm going to take advantage of that aphorism and go ahead and speed up. Speeding up, again, gets us way into the right side of the brain, because there's no way you can logically or paint from a theoretical and logical point of view quickly. So you have to trust your instincts. That's good. All right. I'm using this flat brush, probably beyond its capacity here, by insisting that it generates some nice skinny form. So I may go back in and adjust it. In fact, I'll get that adjustment period started right now by just washing it out of touch. Well, now all we need is a center of interest. Now we have some interesting oozles or bleed backs happening, and normally they don't look attractive. Normally they look pretty awful, and I'm not sure whether those fall within that category. So if I can take advantage of an error or a mistake in watercolor, I will, strictly out of laziness. But so we may have to go back in and paint those over. In fact, I think I will cut down the intensity of them right now. They're tricky to fix. This is a pretty easy one just to paint over. If you can paint over an oozle, then that's you're lucky. Now, let's get into those shacks. The reason why we painted these, this painting is for those shacks. And I've painted myself out of cobalt blue. I'm going to add a little more. You know, if I had one rule of thumb here for the new painter, it would be prepared to use a lot of paint, and check your checkbook about it. Just squeeze out a lot of it, and you can't paint an intense painting without a lot of paint. So that's why I like those big tubes. You know, it's easier to spend a little more on a big tube, and every time you squeeze it out, it's not so much a matter of how much you're spending. The little tubes go very quickly. Now, let's move on. Now, I have a sun position in mind, and that is up here. And consequently, the left side and even the roof is going to be in the sun. And consequently, those will also be the lightest areas. Now, in reality, they were probably light brown. And we may make it light brown, and then the shady sides were a cool, darker brown I'm not going to limit myself to reality on this. I'm going for a colorful shadow area. The shadow areas often are the most colorful. And also, if you'll notice that from that photograph, maybe we can get Roger to switch over to the photograph, that these structures are really falling down. They are on their last stages of existence and didn't last too much longer. I feel it necessary to show them in a little more together state. Often if something really is falling down, then people aren't sure whether it's really falling down or whether you just didn't know how to do the perspective. So I'm definitely showing these two structures as being in an earlier stage, a more virile stage of existence. I would hope if someone were doing a portrait of me that they would have the same point of view. Okay, so the doors that are open should be dark. You're looking inside a dark area and warm. So dark brown would be appropriate. So the overall effect here would be dark, blue and red makes a purple. And there are times though when you can see some cool, if there's interior light or a broken window showing, and you can see some blue. And a touch of blue is sometimes pretty exciting. Now, maybe one of these will end up looking pretty good. Again, I'm scumbling that cerulean blue. When I fall silent, it usually means that I'm doing some serious perceiving, or else I've just lost my tongue or something. But generally, talking and painting don't go well together. But I seem to enjoy it. So what I end up doing is commenting. I let my left brain comment on what the right brain is doing, and it really seems to work pretty well. And in the painting process, often I don't know intellectually where I'm going with this. This one I do. I've done this before, but often I won't. And my right. The hand-eye right side of the brain knows where it does know where it's going, but the intellectual side, which is characterized by the left side of the brain, often is tagging along for the ride, and it finds out about the same time that anyone else looking at the painting would. little violet. I generally mix all my violets and all my greens. I just find you get a much greater variety of greens, certainly, if you mix. And as far as the violets are concerned, same thing there. The available colors of violet, mauves, are very limited, especially in the permanent range, and they're very staining colors. Okay, let me go back into the foreground. Tree trunks are always a challenge on this these winter, fall kind of foliage scenes. Normally, I always do a stroke and then I need to blur it like that, just because the little crossing points where the stems and trunks cross each other are so attention-getting. They're like little targets, and I don't want a little target over in that tree. So we'll try the same thing over here. I'm going to use a little ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, one of my favorite combinations for dark. And we'll paint around some of these trunks. Yep, I forgot a window. The stage, that's easy to fix. This definitely needs some window right there, and it does have one. Now, these little dots, I'm just preparing the page for the application of one of my favorite secrets of the masters. Alleged secrets of the masters. And that's spattering with a toothbrush. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just getting ready to do a little spattering, and that's always a good partial solution to the foreground detail problem. Yeah, one of the least expensive tools available. old toothbrush. Yep, it's a little more than that, a little more water. Just adding texture in the foreground. Snow does have a textural quality in the foreground, and so what we're doing is suggesting that. It adds variety. And also, just because it's in the snow and it makes sense in the snow, doesn't mean it can't be up here too. I'm going to go a little darker. I use my hand to block. And I'm going to do some different size dots. The toothbrush makes a series of dots that are very tiny or just small. But so that's why we need some bigger dots to provide some variety in the sizing of those circular shapes. Now, what I just did there is I call haloing, basically doing a dark edge and then spreading it out. The haloing process is a great way to add impact to an edge without dominating a background. I'm reasonably happy with what's happening in the background. So I'll do a little more haloing over here, and I don't want this to dominate it. So that's what I'm doing now, is spreading it out, lightening it up as it gets away from the area of impact. And we end up with a nice dark edge. Not a line, but an edge. Not a lot of lines in a painting, but lots of edges. Okay. Now, I'm getting to the point of finishing, where I'm about ready to finish the painting. Now, I like to put a mat on it when I do that, and I like to step back and spend a couple of minutes looking at it. But I can tell, even now, I probably need a little more detail in here to work on, and probably need to work that a little bit. And we'll look up here. I think I need some tree forms up here. So let's take a look at it in a mat, and I'll take about a couple of minute break, be with you, and we'll be back with you here shortly to finish this painting up. Thanks. Well, welcome back. I've spent these minutes, amongst other things, looking at the painting and making some decisions on what I think are going to be the final touches needed to make this painting feel good to me. And this is, at this stage of the painting, it's always a trial and error process. So I may put a stroke down and I may take it off right away because I don't like it. When you're learning how to paint, more of the painting is trial and error, and the more experience you have, the fewer trial and error experiences you have, but they're always there, and they're always exciting, because there's always a good possibility of an error. But you shouldn't be worried about errors, because painting is a series of errors that you simply correct, and someone said that, I didn't, and it's true. So let's just dive right in. And I'm going to mix up a neutral blue, and I'm feeling here something in there is necessary, and it may involve trees, but it definitely involves this ridge line. a little more of that haloing idea. I wanted to pick up the tail end of that structure. The center of interest does demand that you put a lot of interest in it and make it as aesthetic as possible, and that's what I'm going to be working with right now. And using this nice round brush, fairly inexpensive. Add some detail here to promote the center of interest. Now this building was really a falling down shack, and there was no window there, but it needed it. So I'm always one for sacrificing authenticity for a good painting. That's a problem with working with photographs. We often feel that we have to be religious to the photograph, and such is not the case. When you're dealing plein air, I love plein air painting, and when you're outside painting, there's so much detail, so much to paint that there's no way you can paint it all, and so you give up that illusion that you have to paint everything. You give up that illusion fairly quickly. Now, even though we're getting pretty dark in here, that's not black. We can actually go darker, and leaving no leaf unturned. Let's see if that's going to help. It may not, but at least it's going to give us a little more value contrast. How much detail to add is an important issue also, because you can overwhelm the viewer with detail, and in so doing you will lose some of the charming effects of watercolor, which make it such an exciting medium, such as throwing a lot of detail in the sky and in the mountain region would lose that connectivity of the blues and the flow that happens here along the lighter shapes through the house into the foreground. And I don't want to lose that. That will definitely cause the painting to suffer. Well, I did a little scrubbing. You notice I scrubbed that area out. And the reason why I did is because all that detail is in the way. It's just a little too fussy. It's taking away from the quality of the blue paint itself, and so I'm going to just overpaint. And if I do that, I should still have the suggestion of that weed, and it'll still function to point up here into the center of interest. Okay, we're getting down here to the last few touches. And I want to emphasize this little weed. Again, that's way overkill. So I'm going to make an adjustment stroke, and I just think the idea of adjusting plan on adjusting every stroke you make. It's very rarely that you can make a complex visual statement with just one stroke of a brush. This brush likes to make sausage-shaped shapes, sausage-like shapes, and it really takes a couple of strokes to pull off work with this, or even the flat brush. Same thing with the flat brush. Now, this is a trial and error, so that's an error. I just don't like that at all. So we're just going to fuzz it out, and I'm going to replace it with some nice rich orange. And see where that takes me. I don't know exactly where it's going to take me, because I think it's going to take me into something where I can add a little bit of, there we go, structure to that. That feels better. Painting is a journey, and because we function beyond our left brain and intellect when we're in the right side of the brain, it's a journey that it's surprising. And it's beyond our egotistical control in many ways. Some people have likened painting in watercolor to well, it's a surprising act, an unfoldment that even the artist doesn't know where it's going. It's because the hand here, this hand and the paintbrush is really beyond my intellectual control. It's got its own life functioning with the right side of my brain. Okay, I think we're going to call this a finished painting. And I'm going to recap here briefly the wet into wet technique. Step one, of course, is to soak the paper and get rid of all the excess graphite. Step two, we have fun with the big brush, the 1-inch, 2-inch brushes, covering the page with paint, going darker and darker, wiping out the areas where I need the white, and recovering the whites as much as I can. The paper's still soaked. And finally, diving in with those spectacular, very dark-looking hues, blues in this case, in this area, if you'll remember. And this is very exciting. You have to go darker than you think, because the paint's going to dry much lighter than you think. At this stage, you should also generate some dark darks, even if you don't know exactly where they're going to be. Do generate them, and that way you'll have a way to balance your painting. You'll know that once you get this in, that's how dark you can go over here and down in here and still make the painting work. Finally, we work with the middle values. We're going light to dark. We make sure the brush is drier than the paper, and we get control of where those shapes go. And we paint around a lot. Painting around the negative shapes, extremely powerful tool in watercolor and any medium. Finally, we're here. We've generated the dark darks, and we're doing the final details. The paper is entirely wet, and within just less than an hour, you have a painting. So thank you very much for joining me, and please stay tuned for more demonstrations, and keep painting.